Hello, this revision podcast is on Labour and Europe 1997 to 2007. Europe was one of Blair's preoccupations. He said, "I will never allow this country to be isolated or left behind." In 1994 he said that. He repeated Major's talk of Britain being at the heart of Europe. However, Blair had both a pro-Euro and an anti-Euro advisor. He did, though, play a prominent role in Europe, and his political style fit well with Gerhard Schroeder and the aspirations of New Europe. In 1997, he instructed British officials to remove Major's objections to the extension of EU authority over the environment, regional policies, criminal justice, and a social chapter. This was to show goodwill, or could have been. But it could also have been, and people have said this, that even at that point he wanted to become president of the EU at some point in the future. In Amsterdam 1997, Blair abandons the opt-out of employment and social policy. In St. Malo in 1998, he withdrew an objection to a common EU defence policy that was separate from NATO. Jacques Chirac, the French president, was delighted with that. He took the lead in issues such as climate change, world trade and relief for Africa. For example, the G8 conference at Gleneagles, which was a personal triumph for Blair. So he was very involved in Europe and wanted to get Britain even more involved in Europe. Now, Blair had a third way at home. He also had a third way in Europe. He said the third way was between the superstaters, who wanted a supranational United States of Europe, and those who were just in it for the free market, aka Thatcher. His way was somewhere in between those. But this was mainly for British consumption, because Europe saw no third way. There's no longer a matter for discussion for them. Britain had to catch up. Let's have a look at his policies on the rebate in Europe and the common agricultural policy. France is arguing that Thatcher's rebate went against the obligations of the treaties that Britain had signed to enter Europe. In 2004, EU enlarged with eastern states, and that meant that obviously we're going to give even more money. So Blair argued that he would not give up the rebate, partly because we never really got it, all of it anyway, and that also Britain had received less from the common agricultural policy than any other major nation. He argued that we could not give back the rebate unless there was a change in the cap. He said he'd be willing to accept majority voting, hoping to get a change in the common agricultural policy, but he didn't get either. He didn't get cap reform, and he buckled on the rebate in 2006. A German newspaper has said that he started out as a tiger and ended up a doormat. What Blair didn't understand is that the cap was the point of Europe for the French. They were never going to renegotiate the cap. And so we ended up having to give £7 billion more in contribution. Bringing us on to the euro. In 2002, all the countries in the European Union, apart from the UK, Denmark and Sweden, adopted the euro. Blair wanted to join, thinking it would put Britain at the heart of Europe and enhance his own standing as a European statesman. Blair said that we would not join in the first wave, but soon after. He said this in 1999. Gordon Brown looked at it from a more economic point of view. He had been generally in favour of the euro, but then he laid down 5 economic tests, along with Ed Balls, that the euro would have to pass before we could adopt it. For example, the effect on inflation, on the effect on jobs and trade, etc. Blair suggested a referendum. Claire Short has even suggested that Blair would have been willing to let Brown take over as Prime Minister if Gordon Brown would have accepted the euro. Blair believed he could educate us into saying yes in this proposed referendum. However, Brown seemed to be doing well in the economy in 2003, and he pointed out that the euro is not meeting the 5 tests, so there's no point in a referendum anyway. Directives. Britain is more compliant in Europe than any other state. Other countries ignore these directives if they don't like them, especially France. 8% of new laws between 1997 and 2007 were from Europe. That's over 3,000 new laws, as well as including the European Convention on Human Rights in the Human Rights Act in 1998. The EU Constitution. In 2004, the Rome TCE, or Treaty Establishing a Constitution for Europe, came into force. Was planned for this to come into force by 2006, provided it was ratified by all member states. Blair promised that we'd have a referendum on that. However, France had a referendum and Denmark had a referendum, and they failed. So the government said our referendum was no longer necessary. However, Eurosceptics said that they still wanted a referendum on it, just to prove that we didn't want to go into Europe any further. So the Rome TCE had been defeated, but a reform treaty was produced in 2007. Now this is no longer a constitution, but it's exactly the same as the TCE in every other way, really. And when the reform treaty was accepted in Lisbon in 2007, the Brown government said there was no need for a referendum on it, as it wasn't a constitution. So it kind of got in by the back door. Like Major and Maastricht, Brown's government pushed this Lisbon Treaty through Parliament. Elsewhere, Britain split with France and Germany over Iraq. Blair argued for EU expansion, i.e. the A8 countries, and the right for them to come here. He helped develop an anti-terror strategy after 9/11 with Europe. He tried to be a bridge between the USA and Europe, but obviously the Iraq war caused a division over that. Overall, Britain as a country remained ambivalent towards Europe, and there have actually been few achievements in Europe in Blair's time. That's what Rose says anyway. Let's have a look at some more historical interpretation. Europe is not mentioned as one of Labour's top 50 achievements on their website in 2008. Andrew Marr says that Blair was never a fanatic on Europe, and Jenkins told Blair that he could either have Europe or Murdoch.